nearly 2,500 arrests in England and Wales since 2019 under the Vagrancy Act. But the history of we have an act, we have a law that was brought in centuries ago, which is still criminalising people at their lowest. Just remind our listeners and viewers where this archaic law started, and it's still with us today.
Okay, so good evening to everybody listening and watching, and of course, good evening to you, Trisha. 200 years ago this year, 1824, the Vagrancy Act comes about in, I think, probably, we can say objectively, I think, shameful circumstances, because, of course, that's around the time that Napoleon suffers his final defeat. It marks the end of those kind of borders on the maps, sliding side to side wars, the Napoleonic Wars. And you have the British Army rapidly reduced in size, many of them press-ganged or tricked into service. Watch a bit of Major Sharp to see all about that. And you have this massive, this volume of jobless and homeless men, not trained in anything except fighting and killing, coming into the streets of the cities. There were encampments. I mean, we're talking about huge numbers of people coming from the Iberian Peninsula, from mainland Europe, and something was decided to be done about those. And basically, it's the criminalisation of sleeping rough and of begging, essentially. And not much has changed really since then.
So hang on, Joseph. Joseph, are you saying so these people had 200 years ago fought for their country or been press ganged into it? They come back, hopeless, probably shell shocked and God knows and wounded, and they litter the streets. They have nowhere to go. So parliamentarians bring in a law to make sleeping rough, aka vagrancy, illegal, so they can chuck them in prison, and that law is still around today.
And I don't think the goal was ever to chuck them in prison, although I read up on it, and it seems that the maximum penalty was 1 month's hard labor, as if they hadn't had enough hard labor of their own with their fighting and their killing and their trudging around. And the interesting thing for me, I think, is probably if you look at the homeless population today in our cities, a tremendous number of mentally ill ex-servicemen. So not much has really changed. Certainly in England and Wales, I have to say, in Scotland, the Act was repealed, thank God, in 1982. In Ireland, and of course, Ireland, even after their War of Independence, I'm going to call it, that act was, because they've inherited our law, Trisha, pre-1922. That act was repealed in 1990, but in England and Wales, literally an offence to sleep on the streets, and use that interesting word, litter. I thought that was fascinating when I heard you say that just now, because litter is how these people are treated. And they're not just ex-servicemen. They're mentally ill people who might, before the 1980s, have been entitled to live in mentally ill homes for the mentally ill until care in the community put paid to that, and the market and the street and, kind of people's families. Of course, these people often don't have families. And of course, we're due to take care of them. And that didn't work. And that kind of burgeoning epidemic of homelessness, it's got worse, not better. I think probably the most...
It's like 2,500 arrests since then. Didn't I thought, though, that the Tories had voted, didn't I read, to get rid of that?
There's been a bit of...
They've not done it.
Yeah, there's been a bit of a pogoing on this issue, hasn't there? Because we did get a couple of years ago law passed, but not, voted on, but not passed with the statutory instrument that makes it a law. And the excuse that's been given, and I think this is a superficial and cynical excuse, actually, is that we don't have any appropriate legislation to replace it. Why should you replace legislation? Why not just repeal it as other countries have done? Shouldn't be a crime to not have a home. But at the same time, that comes across the backdrop, doesn't it, of a deeply uncaring trend on the fringes of the Tory party that sadly has
I was
become
going to say,
the mainstream of the Tory party.
Am I right in saying that if they do repeal it, get rid of it, which we think they should, they face a backlash from more than 40 conservative MPs over a part of the criminal bill, which would allow the police to, quote, fine nuisance rough sleepers, a definition that includes excessive noise and smells. And under their provisions, rough sleepers could be moved on, fined up to £2,500, where they're going to get that, or imprisoned.
Yeah. But isn't this? Yeah. What? Isn't this exactly reminiscent of those periods around the 1820s when those people were coming home? They'd been out protecting the empire, preventing Napoleonic domination across Europe, although some people, fans of Napoleon, might not think that was the worst thing in the world. But they had been serving their country and ensuring the future of the empire. And they came round and they were unsightly, they were smelly, their presence was uncomfortable. And it wasn't like the Americans oversexed and over here. These weren't Americans. These were British soldiers, and we're treating not just our ex-servicemen, but our weak and our poor and our ill in precisely the same way. It's not just this government, although this government has been the worst, suggesting that homelessness is a lifestyle choice. Shamefully.
Oh, don't get me started on that one. Yeah. Good God, get me.
But the Blair and Brown weren't much better. They had a chance to deal with this and they didn't. And it should be stopped. Keir Starmer is going to have a fantastic mandate with a landslide election victory. I think we all see that's happening. And if that is the case, it's an opportunity to do the right thing and end the ban on homelessness.